Since 2020, with the release of the original Asics Nova Blast, which really caught everybody, including the industry, off guard with just how exciting that shoe was, Asics has become one of the most beloved brands in running. Year after year, they continually produce a few models that are at the top of pretty much everyone's best of list, and they've had some really smart engineering that has made some really great products. But the thing that's always held Asics running back has been their foams. FF Blast, their training foam, which launched with the original Nova Blast, was fun and bouncy, but it was a little inconsistent and it definitely didn't have the durability that I think a lot of people expected. FF Turbo, which launched in 2021 with the original Metaspeed, wasn't quite at the same level of performance as what Nike and Adidas were putting out there as far as super foams, and it could be a little harsh. But in 2025, with the release of these 5 shoes, Asics has given us a glimpse into the future, and they put 2 new foams into the market, which I would argue are probably the best 2 new foams of 2025. And this has given us a glimpse as to where they're headed as a brand, and it's quite exciting. And as I do on this channel, let's go back and trace the history of Asics' foam to actually see how we got where we are now. And that story starts in 2015 with the introduction of Flyte Foam in the Asics Meta Run. Now, the Meta Run was a bit of a tech concept shoe. It was the culmination of about 3 years of development for Asics to create the ultimate shoe. It had a lot of interesting design ideas in it, but the one that's really stuck around till today is Flyte Foam. The FF in all of Asics' foam actually is Flyte Foam. So this is sort of the parent of every foam that's come after that. Now, Flyte Foam was just an EVA foam, but the selling point for it was that it was 55% lighter than standard EVA. Now, in 2015, this is pre-super shoe foam talk. So when we were talking about performance foams back then, we were talking about weight and cushioning. Adidas Boost was around. That was still a little bit more training oriented, but still the story for Boost was cushioning. So we were talking about weight and cushioning. And Flyte Foam was always a bit of a firmer foam, but definitely on par with every other performance foam that was coming out at the time. It always reminded me of falling somewhere between Nike Phylon foam and Nike Cushlon foam. It wasn't quite as firm as Phylon, and it wasn't quite as soft as Cushlon. It was really right in the middle, again, on par with a lot of other performance foams coming out from other brands back in 2015. In 2020, this is where we got the introduction of FF Blast foam in that original Asics Nova Blast. Now, FF Blast was a little bit different. It was an EVA blended with synthetic fibers. And the selling point for this was that it was 24% more bounce. Remember, this is now 2020, 5 years after the introduction of Flyte Foam. We are now in the super shoe era, so the idea of energy return or bounce or resilience was something we were definitely talking about. And I really remember FF Blast being marketed as just bouncy and fun, and it caught a lot of people's attention. The Nova Blast was really popular for a reason, because the foam was quite a lot of fun to run in, but it just wasn't the most consistent foam. In 2021, we saw the introduction of FF Turbo, which was Asics' first modern racing foam, and that showed up first in the original Metaspeeds. And the selling point for this foam was that it was the snappiest, bounciest, most responsive foam Asics had put out to date. The chemistry of this foam was just a generic PBA. It was never really specified as to what it was. It wasn't PBAX. It wasn't the same material Nike was using in Zoom X. It was just the generic version of PBA. Now, FF Turbo was never quite at the same level of performance as what Nike and Adidas were putting out there with their top super foams, and it was quite a harsh foam. In fact, if I did a hard workout in an FF Turbo shoe, I could barely walk the next day. It was just really harsh, really beat up your legs. But it was definitely a step in the right direction and an evolution on top of FF Blast as their training foam. 2022 saw the introduction of FF Blast Plus, originally in the Asics Gel Nimbus 24, but I think the shoe most people remember that foam in was the Nova Blast 3. The selling point of FF Blast Plus was that it was 20% lighter and 12% more responsive than FF Blast. But in my experience with FF Blast Plus, it was even more inconsistent. It could be a lot of fun, but it could also just be spongy and mushy. And you never really knew. Over, say, 100 kilometers in an FF Blast Plus shoe, you would go from a foam that kind of felt meh to a foam that felt amazing for about 30K to a foam that just felt spongy and mushy and just not fun to run in. And that's where some of the real inconsistencies in Asics foams really started to come to a head. 2023 saw the introduction of FF Blast Plus Eco, originally in the Asics Nova Blast 4, and this was really just a small evolution on top of FF Blast Plus, really just adding some biomaterials into that foam. Usually when you add biomaterials into a foam, it kind of deadens the foam or it makes it less durable, and FF Blast Plus was already not the most durable foam, but I actually found FF Blast Plus Eco to be more consistent and actually quite durable, quite a bit more durable than FF Blast Plus. It was probably my favorite of the FF Blast Plus lineup. And I put a lot of time into the Nova Blast 4, and I never really had an issue, and I never really had FF Blast Plus Eco change on me the way a just normal FF Blast Plus would. Maybe it wasn't as fun, maybe it wasn't as responsive, maybe it was a little bit step back as far as performance, but it was definitely the most consistent FF Blast Plus foam that we had seen to date. 2024 saw the introduction of FF Turbo Plus, originally in the Asics Metaspeed Paris series. This was still a generic PIBA foam, but it was now lighter and airier. The selling points for this was that it was 8% lighter, 6% softer, and 8.2% more energy return over FF Turbo. And this foam was a big step for Asics. It definitely had more performance. It still wasn't quite at the same level as what Nike and Adidas were putting out, but it was very, very close. It was still a bit of a harsh foam, but nowhere near as harsh as FF Turbo was. And I think the Metaspeed Paris series really showed where Asics could go if they actually started to have a really quality performance foam. Again, wasn't quite there yet, but it was so close, and it gave us a glimpse as to where they were going. And also in 2024, we got FF Blast Max, which was originally released in the Glide Ride Max, but I think most people remember it in the Nova Blast 5. This was, to me, the more consistent FF Blast Plus foam. Didn't have the biomaterial in it. It was the most energetic foam that Asics had put out to date as far as training foams. And it felt like all the good parts of FF Blast Plus with none of that mushiness, none of that sponginess. It was a foam that had a surprising amount of responsiveness and performance, but still there were a lot of complaints about durability, that it just didn't last for more than 150, maybe 200 kilometers, which was not enough really for a training foam. And this brings us into 2025, where we've seen the introduction of two wonderful foams from Asics. The first being FF Leap, which we saw debut in the Metaspeed Tokyo series, most importantly in the Metaspeed Ray, which is a full midsole of FF Leap. Now, FF Leap is a completely new chemistry for Asics. It is now an ATPU-based foam. The promise of ATPU foams is that they have similar energy return to a PBEX type foam, but they have greater durability. Not only durability as far as abrasion resistance for the road, but more durability about how long the performance of the foam lasts. The foam theoretically breaks down slower than a PBEX foam, so that performance that you get out of the box should last you much longer. The selling points for FF Leap were that it was 15% lighter, 14% more responsive, and 30% softer than FF Turbo Plus. And that softness is key. FF Leap is a very soft foam. Can be unstable for some runners, but it's very dynamic, very resilient, a ton of energy return, and finally Asics has a racing foam that is on par with what Nike and Adidas are putting out there in market, and that's something they needed for a long time. And also in 2025, we got a second foam from Asics, one called FF Turbo Squared. This debuted in the Asics Mega Blast and Sonic Blast, though the Mega Blast is the one that has the full midsole of FF Turbo Squared. Now this is also an ATPU based foam, so all of the advantages I just talked about with FF Leap. However, this is a training foam specifically. This isn't a watered down version of FF Leap. This is a foam developed specifically for training, which I think is actually brilliant. The selling points for FF Turbo Squared are that it's 32% bouncier, 9.6% softer, and 2.8% lighter than FF Turbo Plus. So they're basing this new performance foam off of their previous race foam. I think that is a real big glimpse as to where Asics is headed with their foams and many of their shoes. So here's where we are at the end of 2025 with Asics foam. We have FF Leap, which is their racing foam. It's an ATPU foam tuned for maximum energy return. And again, you can see that in the Metaspeed Ray. That is a very dynamic, very resilient shoe. Maybe not the most stable shoe, but again, it's the pinnacle of performance for Asics racing right now. And again, it's on par with anything else from any other brand right now. FF Turbo Squared is their performance training foam. Again, it's an ATPU foam tuned for bounce or energy return and protection. And that's important because this isn't just a watered down version of FF Leap. This is a new foam developed specifically for training, specifically for performance training, which is something that Asics has never really had, because the other foam that's current in the lineup is FF Blast Max, which is their just all-around training foam. It's that EVA blend tuned for comfort. And these three foams together fully flesh out a really robust lineup for any running shoe that they want to do, from training through performance training into racing. And performance, again, is a bit of a new category for Asics foams, because that's a foam that can be used for training and it can be used for just everything that FF Blast Max could, but it's got similar performance to FF Leap, and it's a little bit more stable, so it's a good compromise for a lot of runners. 2025 also feels like a bit of a transition year because we're still seeing Asics shoes with two foams or a combination of foams in them. Mainly the Metaspeed Tokyo series, the Sky and the Edge, they still have FF Turbo Plus and FF Leap in them. Now FF Turbo Plus is the old racing foam and FF Leap is the new racing foam. And in some ways, if the Metaspeed Ray didn't exist, the Metaspeed Sky and Edge Tokyo would have been full FF Leap foam. They wouldn't have had that FF Turbo Plus layer in them. But because Asics really wanted to make sure that the Metaspeed Ray stood out as the pinnacle of their racing performance, that's why I think the Metaspeed Sky and Edge Tokyo did get that secondary foam. And Asics reps have also said that they wanted to add a little bit more stability into the Sky and Edge Tokyo, and that's where FF Turbo Plus comes in. But still, from a messaging standpoint, it's a little strange to have your newest, greatest foam, FF Leap, combined with your older foam that seems to be being replaced. So it's created a little bit of a messaging problem for Asics. Additionally, we've seen the Sonic Blast come out, which has a combination of FF Turbo Squared and FF Blast Max. So this is that performance foam combined with a training foam. So it's a little bit of a confusing mix of foams, but I think something that Asics has shown is they like to tune their midsoles with a combination of foam, and these are two good examples of what they're thinking. And looking ahead into 2026, there's two other shoes coming out that will show a combination of foams and how Asics wants to continue mixing these foams to really tune the midsoles. The first one will be the Super Blast 3, which we've seen a lot now in leaks, and we've got confirmation that it will be FF Leap primarily, and there is a secondary foam in that shoe, but we don't know what that secondary foam is. Now, traditionally, the secondary foam, the one that's closer to the ground in the Super Blast, has always been FF Blast, some version of that to really smooth out the harshness of FF Turbo. But with FF Leap being a much more resilient, much more bouncy foam that isn't as harsh as FF Turbo and FF Turbo Plus have been, it's interesting to think about what that secondary layer could be. Could it be FF Turbo Plus to bring a little structure to FF Leap because it is such a soft foam? That wouldn't necessarily make sense to me because it seems like they want to move away from FF Turbo Plus and really embrace FF Leap as the only race foam. Could it be FF Turbo Squared, which from a naming convention that still has the turbo name, but now that's a performance tier foam. In some ways it would make sense, but also I think it would be a little strange to combine those two foams in that shoe in that way. Could it be FF Blast Max? I don't know, and frankly, I hope it's not because I do not think FF Leap needs the softness of FF Blast Max in it. So I'm really going to be curious about which foam actually ends up as the secondary foam in the Super Blast 3. And the other shoe coming out next year that's going to be a combination of foams is one we've just gotten a little bit more information about, and that's the Magic Speed 5. Now we've seen through the leaks of that it is FF Leap primarily in the forefoot of that shoe, but there is a secondary foam in that shoe. The most recent leaked images of this shoe have actually shown this shoe to be a little bit lower stack. Going back to the roots of what the Magic Speed has been, it's a lot closer to the Magic Speed 3 than the Magic Speed 4, which is really great to my ears. And Asics reps have confirmed that the Magic Speed is going back to something that's more racy, a little bit more Takumi Sen, Streak Fly-like, and all of that Super Trainer vibe is now going to be in the Sonic Blast. And it's interesting they're putting FF Leap in the Magic Speed because that means they really are looking at that as a kind of lower stack racing option for some runners. But again, what is going to be the secondary foam in that shoe? I actually think FF Turbo Squared would make sense in that shoe because this will be a performance trainer fundamentally that could race. So combining FF Leap and FF Turbo Squared together in a shoe I think would make much more sense in the Magic Speed 5. It could be FF Blast Max, but again, I hope not because I don't think FF Leap needs the softness of FF Blast Max. I think it has plenty on its own. I do think it needs more of the resilience and some of the snap of FF Turbo Squared. I don't think it'll be Turbo Plus, and I don't think it'll be a just standard Flyte Foam midsole, so I'm really curious where the Magic Speed 5 ends up. But again, some exciting shoes and some exciting combinations of foams moving ahead for Asics. Now personally, I don't always like combinations of foams. I think you can combine two foams to tune a shoe very specifically, and Asics has shown they really like to do that. But for example, with the next generation of Metaspeeds, I fully expect them to be all FF Leap. The FF Turbo Plus layer that's in the Sky and Edge Tokyo is going to be gone, because this will put all three Metaspeeds at the same level, and the Ray now will have been out, so it will be that pinnacle ultra lightweight, ultra responsive racing shoe, and that frees up the next gen of the Metaspeeds to be all of the new foam, which they should have been this generation, but they definitely will be in the next generation. And I think shoes like the Asics Mega Blast show that using a single foam really gives you a very, very direct ride. Because that shoe is just one piece of foam, there's no carrier foam, there's no glue layer, there's no plate, there's nothing else in the midsole of the Mega Blast. Even though that's a max cushion shoe, you do get a lot of feel for the ground. You get a very direct feel on foot, and that's because it's just a single piece of foam. I think that's brilliant. So again, Asics has the foams now to really work with finally, which is again the missing piece that they just haven't had over the past few years. So moving forward, I do hope we see more single foam shoes, and where they really want to tune specific rides, I think they will continue to double up foams and combine their various foams to really tailor the rides that they want out of their products. And lastly, the biggest question I have over Asics Foams is what is the future of FF Blast Max? Is FF Blast going to stay a blended EVA platform, or is it also going to move to ATPU? To me, it would make sense for them to move it to ATPU. You're going to get the durability that Blast has never really had because it's a blended EVA. And I do think Asics needs a slightly more comfort first all-around training foam, because I think FF Turbo Square is just a little bit too performance oriented for just kind of general usage about how maybe a Nova Blast would be used. So I'm really curious where that one's going to net out in 2026. But if you've been a fan of Asics for the past 5 years, now is the time to be really excited because their foams are finally on par at the race level. I think they are probably making the best training foam right now with FF Turbo Squared. And if they really tweak and figure out something with FF Blast Max, that's going to also make that probably the best all-around training foam or entry-level foam for running shoes. So now's the time to be excited about Asics, and I think 2026 is going to be quite interesting to watch for the brand. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you want to support what I do here, check out sagasrunning.com for merch or click the join button below. Neither one of those options are good for you. Leave a comment, leave a like, because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.